You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Robert Longyear, author of Innovating for Wellness. Robert is a graduate of Georgetown University, where he studied healthcare management and policy, and as he believes it is one of the most intricate, complex, and important industries on the planet. Welcome, Robert. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, Robert, congratulations on writing your book. We see that you're obviously a big healthcare fan, but what specifically did you write about healthcare?
So I kind of cover three major topics. One is what I did my thesis research on at Georgetown. I studied payment model changes. So the way that we pay for healthcare currently is when you go see your doctor, the doctor does appointments and whatever tests and procedures, and then they get paid based on whatever those procedures were. So it really incentivizes volume. So your doctor only gets paid if you keep coming back, which means that there's something wrong. And so we don't like that. It incentivizes lots and lots of healthcare to be provided, and it doesn't necessarily incentivize good quality healthcare or good outcomes. I did research on a way that the policy community and certain states are trying to remove that payment structure so that we try to incentivize outcomes and incentivize care and incentivize high quality services. It's called value-based payment. So the next area I write about is technology. So one thing that we've learned is in order for these payment models to work, you need to be able to actually help patients get healthier. And so that's very challenging. Healthcare services are not necessarily as effective as we like to think they are. And so the system is now having to come up with ways to actually help patients get better, which is the purpose. But if they're unable to do that, then these models fail. So I talk about that. And then the last thing I talk about is through stories. So part of what motivated me to write the book is I lost my mom to leukemia when I was 20.
Oh,
and sorry.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. We had a very difficult time, but while I was studying healthcare, I was also experiencing it, and so a lot of my work now and a lot of my research was focused on how can we solve some of the pain points that my family experienced and that my mom experienced and that I experienced, and so that was sort of the motivation behind the book a little bit more, as well as sort of just my interest.
Great. So it certainly sounds like an interesting topic. Who are you hoping the ultimate reader is?
I would say healthcare professionals, people interested in healthcare. What I tried to do was not make it just a jumbled mess of academic writing. It's told through stories. It's told about startup entrepreneurs. It's told about researchers. It's my own personal story. So it's engaging, and it brings some of these innovative topics that are typically only talked about in academia or in health policy to make it more accessible for everybody. So it's understandable, I think. So anybody could read it, but I think I've really geared it towards people who are interested in healthcare, work in healthcare. But what I'd say is anybody who's ever been a patient or might be a patient would probably be interested in this.
Well, I think it's a good idea that you incorporated the stories.
Yeah. When I got a phone call from the person that introduced me to the publisher, he's a professor at Georgetown. I told him a while back that I wanted to write a book, and he called me and was like, "Hey, do you want to write a book?" And I was like, "Yeah." He ended up calling me and said, "I have a spot open for you." He was like, "Don't write your thesis again." He was like, "Nobody wants to hear that." He's like, "You have to tell it through stories, that even good nonfiction books are told through stories. Nobody wants to read your data and your research. They want something to understand it through and to be engaged with."
Some great advice, I think.
So you said a professor came to you and asked you to write a book. Explain what that's all about.
So I actually reached out to him. He had a class where he was helping students sort of write books. It was part of the class. He was doing a little bit of an experiment. I reached out to him and said, "I can't take your class, but I want to write a book." And he was like, "Oh, well, I don't have space in the class. But he ended up sending me an email and giving me a call in June of last year saying, hey, I have a spot open up. We're doing things a little differently now if you want to write a book. And so he's affiliated with a sort of a startup publisher that's trying to use a different model for publishing than what's typically been done for a long time. They see it as a new model to sort of, in line with your podcast, sort of help authors or first-time authors write books and be able to publish it instead of having to go through it themselves. So they've sort of flipped the traditional publishing model.
Great. Sounds like he might be a good guest for our show.
Yes, absolutely.
So then you contact the professor. The professor says, great, I have some time for you. What was the process like of cultivating the stories and making them interesting and editing them down?
I did a whole bunch of interviews, and it was fortunate for me at the time because I was working for a research institute and I was going to a conference and I was able to get some interviews from some researchers there. And then I knew a lot of people in the field, so I was able to get a lot of interviews with that. And so I did probably about 25 interviews with people that were working on specific topics that I thought I might want to cover.
Great.
And I tried to find people that had sort of personal stories or personal connections to healthcare, and it's not surprising that it's not hard to find that. The people that are very interested and engaged in healthcare typically have a reason for that. So I did a lot of phone interviews. I asked them questions that I was working on my thesis, and then I had worked a little bit in digital health technology. I was finding people that I wanted to interview. I collected all those. I took my notes, and I kind of started writing the book from the outline that made sense to me, and then I figured out how to fit in these stories later. I would sort of synthesize the stories, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to find a place for this at some point.
Good.
But I started with sort of the framework of what I want to say. I started with the data and the points I wanted to use, sort of wrote the book through like that, and then I was like, okay, it's time to add color to this. So then I came in and figured out where these stories would fit. And sometimes it went the other way around where I was like, oh, I like this story. I'm going to use this and find evidence to support what he's saying or she's saying. That's sort of one of the ways I did it. As I sort of was moving into the book, I actually ended up getting a job offer at a digital health tech startup. Then I ended up sort of living my book. So I was writing about digital health technology and startups and how they were trying to shape healthcare of the future, and I was then doing it myself. So that was pretty immersive. So as I started working in that, I started meeting more people, so I got some more interviews, and then I was able to incorporate my own story with this too. It kind of worked out pretty well for me.
So it seems like you were extremely busy. How did you fit the writing in?
So I started out being a little bit more specific about it. So I scheduled 3 times a week to sit down for about 2.5 hours, 2 weeknights, and then on Sunday. And I was sort of writing during that time, but then life got a little crazy. So I started writing whenever I had free time. The thing is that putting words on a page is not difficult for me. A lot of people, I think, have difficulty just coming up with what to write. My problem is the opposite. I can sit there and write just an enormous amount of words and pages, but my problem is going back and making sure I'm being concise and clear, and I'm not saying too much. So you can't write a 700-page book and expect people to want to read the whole thing. So you have to be concise, and that was kind of the hard part for me. So the publisher provided us with a developmental editor. The developmental editor would read my books and my book and my stories, kind of provide feedback and say, hey, this doesn't make sense, or kind of coach me on more engaging writing, because I was coming from academic writing. I just wrote a very long thesis, and it's a very different style.
Sure.
They were like, you need to catch me at the beginning of this chapter to make me want to keep reading it. You have to make like sort of an interesting story at the beginning or some interesting dialogue to sort of catch people at the beginning, as opposed to starting out with introduction and methods and going to results and sort of the discussion at the end. It's a little bit different type of writing, which I eventually got into a little bit more. It took me a little while. And my editor kept being like, "You're boring me here. I need you to give me something more." So that was a little bit of a transition. It took time learning that. And now I think I've got it down. It's fun now, I would say.
Great.
So the book just got out of copy editing. I'm currently just going through and making sure that I want to say what I said in certain pieces, and considering taking a chapter out that's a little redundant. So it's just a matter of reading again. Right. Which is an exhausting process. So like sure. I could probably like pretty much almost verbatim sort of read say the book. And so like you just have to read it a whole bunch of times. And so you get tired of hearing yourself talk, and it's difficult to catch your own stuff. Right. So you have to have somebody else read it. So having an editor being able to do that's very helpful. And having a couple other people who are familiar with the field read it and just be like, "Hey, I don't know if I agree with this point that you're making," is also very helpful. So there's like the writing part, which is fine. But then if you're writing a nonfiction book, it comes down to like, this is my name's on this. We have to make sure that's right.
Sure facts.
Sure.
And sometimes there's competing facts, so you have to choose your camp. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a lot of people that don't believe that the ACO model is going to be around to stay. They don't believe that it's going to be effective. And so there's data on both sides of the argument. And so you have to make your case in that.
So we saw on Indiegogo that you started a campaign. Can you tell us about starting that campaign?
The publisher helps you do your pre-sale in order to fund sort of the publishing costs for the actual book, and then it funds your editor and your copy editing and cover design. The Indiegogo campaign, they provided a lot of sort of the language and how to kind of optimize the campaign for search engine optimization, which is sort of how Indiegogo works. And so you write that. They shot a video, so I got to go to the publisher and sat down and talked about the book, and then they shot the video. And
that's nice because then people who want to contribute get to know you and maybe connect with people through the video. So that's wonderful.
Absolutely. So they've done a lot of work with this. They have sort of the digital marketing people that work on it. So it was very helpful having that. The cover was fun. It was very challenging. But what they had us do is there was like a 4-part exercise. It was, sort of what's your book about in a couple different lines. And then they wanted us to go find 6 pictures online that we thought were descriptive of the book. So we went and found 6 pictures online, and I put them into a sheet. And then they were like, go find some book covers of current books that you like, that you think would be good for this. So I went and found 4 or 5 of those. And then the editor-in-chief would call, and we'd walk through them all. Basically, what would happen is kind of a discussion of what we like and don't like on the covers. And that sort of created a list. And he would sit there and kind of talk with me about it and write some notes at the bottom of the page and what I liked and what I didn't like and what he thought would be good. And so we kind of came to a decent description of what we wanted on the cover. And then they take that to the graphic designers and they make 2 versions. And one of the perks on the Indiegogo campaign for people who buy in the presale, they get to pick either or of those covers.
That's cool.
Oh, yeah.
That's really neat. Yeah. So it sounds like a great idea for designing like anything. I mean, a web page or, a thumbnail for your podcast. Find things that you like, find a series of them, and then, talk it out with somebody to see what the common thing is. And then you give it to somebody to design.
I am sure it would be helpful to a lot of graphic design artists to know exactly what the author's thinking.
Yes, absolutely. I didn't have a vision for it. I sometimes, like with these types of things, I like to just, give them sort of what the book's about and say, give me your best, like surprise me. But I think this process worked really well.
After the Indiegogo campaign ends, then the idea is that the people who have signed up get a copy to be a beta reader. And then will there be another campaign to sell the book? Or then does it go on to Amazon and to bookstores?
After the Indiegogo campaign that funds the copy editing and the cover and getting the book bound, then it will go on Amazon and wherever else the publisher sells them, typically online, I think. And then the thing with this publisher is they make their money and are able to do this process based on sort of this pre-process to be able to do the pre-sale and to fund that. through this sort of supportive reverse publishing process. And then you still own 100% of the book.
Oh, good.
So
Great.
I reached out recently to the publisher that does the Health Information Management Society's book series. I'm talking to them a little bit. So what I will probably do once it's already sort of on Amazon and stuff, I will go to them and work with them on it as well for distribution.
This episode of the Author Inside You podcast is brought to you by Scribophile. Okay, so now everyone's really excited because they listened to our podcast and you're ready to write your book. But maybe you need some more inspiration.
Scribophile is the place to go. If you're looking for other writers who can help you improve your writing style and give you feedback on your writing, then this is the place to go. Plus, you can help give other people feedback on their writing at Scribophile.
Let's face it, we all like to find people who are similar to us. And on Scribophile, there are plenty of groups that you can join.
There are great articles in the blog section of Scribophile. In fact, I just read one on how to land a job as a freelance writer. Really interesting stuff.
My favorite articles on the blog are the Q&As with professional authors. If you're concerned about your writing level, don't be. Scribophile is a safe place for you to write. They have all levels of writers.
So for some extra inspiration on your writing, check out scribophile.com. So Robert, what kind of advice do you have for somebody who's working on a book right now?
So like where I'm at with the process right now is it's just something that I've been thinking about since June. And with the goal of knowing that I'm publishing in April 2020, it's fun. It's this battle between I really have been doing like work all day. I don't really want to get home and write this book, or like I don't want to spend my weekends doing this, and enjoying it. I like the scheduling, but I also think that you need to look at it as a fun activity to do. You're writing a book because you want to write the book. And while it is like a pretty intensive, intricate process that requires a whole bunch of time, you have to think of it as something that's fun. If you're not enjoying what you're writing about, you need to change your topic. I think interviewing people and talking to them and getting excited and building sort of a network around your book is also very helpful. So that's one thing that was great at the beginning. You get to talk to people about you're writing a book and you want to include their story in there, and they're excited about it too, because I followed up with them all after interviewing them, telling them the story. I sent them the chapter and said, hey, I just want to make sure this is right for accuracy. Idea. They were very excited about it.
Great.
They went through and did edits. They read the book. One of them just got back to me and said, hey, this is really good. You captured this very well.
Wow, that must feel great to hear that.
It was great. It's great, and they shared the post on LinkedIn. So
wow,
excellent.
Yeah. So that was really nice. The other hardest part besides scoping the book was like this feeling of imposter syndrome. So
many authors talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is probably one of the tougher things. I thought when I set out to write this book that I knew what I was talking about. Like I felt like I just wrote a thesis, and I knew how to find the information I needed to find, or I knew who to talk to. But the biggest lesson was like after reading this book is like I don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much information out there and so many people working on similar things that you really learn how much you don't know. And that really drives a lot of the sort of feeling of can I even say this? Or who am I to say this?
Mm-hmm.
So, but for the most part, it seems like people really are rooting for others. Most people want to see people succeed. So the people you did speak with are rooting for you. They want you to do well.
Yes, absolutely. So building that like network and that ecosystem around the book, I think is very positive. And people do want it to succeed, and people are glad about it. And I think it's a lot of overcoming it. There's nothing externally that's real that should make anybody feel like what they're writing about, or they're not good enough to write this book, or they're not like an authority on the topic. What it is sort of an internal struggle, I think.
Sure, that's what we hear.
And that is what you have to overcome.
Robert, what's the best way to find you on Indiegogo?
I learned yesterday that you could just Google innovating for wellness and it pulls it up.
Oh, great.
That was cool. I saw that as the first thing on there. You can also go to Indiegogo.com and search for innovating for wellness and the book will pop up. And there's a nice description there and you can watch the video to learn more. And then you can also follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot about digital health and healthcare in general, very much in line with what my book's about. And you can follow me on Twitter at RL Longyear.
Excellent. We'll have those links in our show notes.
Excellent. Yeah, that'll be great.
All right, Robert. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was great to meet you, and it was great to talk about the process.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Robert. Well, if you have a brother, a sister, or a mother who's interested in writing a book, it would be great if you could turn them on to the Author Inside You podcast.
Until next time.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.